17th and 18th centuries were eras of profound change throughout Europe. While there was a definite middle class at this point, imperial rulers also began to consolidate their power. Rulers claimed that they had a divine right to rule. This isn't really any different than anything we have seen before. This means that they were ordained by God to govern their territory. These rulers wielded absolute power over their subjects, so this period is often referred to as the Age of Absolutism. Naturally, this type of ruling would eventually lead to various revolutions in the late 18th and 19th century. Due to struggles between absolute rulers, the political troubles of the previous century continue, if not increase. Royal powers continue to intermarry and fight to control parts of Europe. Also, in part as a result of absolutism and imperialism, the bases of modern nations start to emerge. Coinciding with this imperial mindset, we see colonial expansion during the 17th and 18th centuries. The Americas, Africa, and part of the Middle East were beginning to be colonized at this time. As a result, we see dramatic cultural and economic changes based on this great expansion of the known world in a very short amount of time. So originally they thought the world was basically like this. And now they realize that there is much more to it. So it does profoundly affect their world. Colonies bring in wealth, exotic materials, and power for countries which control them. Trade also increases dramatically, especially between Europe and Asia. The increase in trade led to a wealthy economy and the rise of the merchant class or the middle class. Art becomes a commodity to the middle class in addition to the extremely wealthy and the church. This is especially true in Northern Europe. Science also becomes more important during this period as people begin to understand and question the world scientifically. However, despite extraordinary advances in philosophy and science, the spirit of the age will still be dominated by religion and a concern for the spiritual well-being. We call the end of the 16th century into the 18th century the Baroque period. This refers to this historical time period, but it's also used to describe an art style, a specific art style. The term Baroque was used in the late 1700s, and it was meant to be a derogatory term, so a negative term, to characterize the exuberant and extravagant aspect of some of the art of the early mid-18th century. So they coined this term kind of retroactively during the mid-18th century. So there is some debate about what exactly defines the Baroque style. So for our purposes, we'll be kind of specific. For us, we'll say that art that's labeled the Baroque style actually shares some characteristics. Usually Baroque art is looking for an emotional response rather than an intellectual response. So they want to evoke intense emotional responses in the viewer. This contrasts the Renaissance period. In the Renaissance period, they wanted an intellectual response from the viewer. They also had an interest in exploiting the dramatic moment through the choice of subject and style. We will see open, diagonal, dramatically lit, theatrical compositions. They will use mixed media. Basically, this could mean like they might mix maybe marble and bronze and stucco all in one piece. They have a concern for the manipulation of space. They like to, especially in sculpture, they like to create pieces that invade the viewer's space. But in painting, we'll actually see that a little bit as well. They use a technique called tenebrism or chiaroscuro. This deals with lighting effects, and it's kind of a contrast between light and dark, and we'll look at that in detail in a little bit. And sometimes they use looser brushwork. Architecture and sculpture will share some of these characteristics, particularly the exploitation of space and the viewer's response. The Baroque art period coincides with the Counter-Reformation, advancements in science, and the expanding of the world, so through exploration and trade, and also into the New World, so colonization. It also coincides with the rise of private patronage in the arts. One artist that really helps define this Baroque style is Bernini. Bernini was taught by his father. He was trained by sketching the Vatican collection of ancient sculptures and Renaissance painting in the Papal Palace. And his style is really a true product of Roman art. He appreciated the classics and he considered himself as continuing the Renaissance. So if you talk to Bernini when he was alive, he would think he was creating art that was similar to Michelangelo or Raphael or Leonardo da Vinci or Donatello. So he really considered himself continuing the Renaissance tradition, but he's actually this breakthrough artist who helps define this new Baroque style. We do know that he was a deeply religious man, and he was devoted to the Catholic Church. One of the projects that Bernini worked on in the 17th century was St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. He was actually commissioned to finish Mordino, who you read about in your books, work on the Vatican. And he actually does end up being appointed the Vatican architect in 1629. So he's commissioned to design a colonnade to enclose the square in front of the church, so this part right here. Now, the space allotted for this colonnade was actually really awkward. So if you kind of pretend like the colonnade's not there and you're looking at this image, it is this really weird space. It's also very limiting. Bernini also had to incorporate some pre-existing architectural elements into his design. So he's got to kind of adhere to the church and the buildings that were there around him. And then there's also this obelisk and these two fountains that he needs to incorporate into his design as well, because they didn't want to get rid of these. So basically what he does is, remember you read in your book that there's actually like a lot of designers that work on St. Peter's. He unites all these different designs. So Michelangelo worked on the dome. Bramante original design is really what it's all based on. And so he was able to unite all these different architectural styles into this one composition, to this one monument / building. So what he does is he creates two semicircular colonnades, these right here, which are 4 Doric columns deep. They frame a large double piazza in front of St. Peter's, and they connect to these 2 straight porticos right here that then lead you to the church's facade. Bernini compared the shape of these colonnades to the open motherly arms of the church. So in a way, this is very much a counter-Reformation monument. So welcoming people back into the church. The genius of his work is that he used this limited, awkward space, but managed to connect these different styles of the complex, giving the building a united front. And so it becomes an architectural masterpiece, but also it is a symbol for the power and superiority of Catholicism, which he firmly believed in. And here's another angle of his colonnades here. Now, Bernini actually began his career as a sculptor, so he did do some architecture, but he also favored sculpture as his kind of main art form. But he continues to work in both mediums, and he actually kind of mixes them a lot. In 1624, Pope Urban VIII commissioned Bernini to design a baldachin, or a canopy over the high altar of St. Peter's tomb. We call it the baldacchino, and the purpose of this canopy was to make the huge vault of the crossing seem smaller and to attract the attention of the viewer to the altar. So in this image we can see Michelangelo's dome over here. To achieve this, Bernini used gilt bronze, marble, stucco, and glass. As a result, he created a massive 100-foot high canopy with these twisty columns that were inspired by the columns found in Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. The columns are delicately covered with grapevines, which represent the union of the Old and New Testaments. So the columns are referring to the Jewish past with their shape, And the grapevine symbolizes the Eucharist and the Christian past, present, and future. The fancy capitals that you see here are a combination of Ionic and Corinthian orders, and they support an entablature. That's this part right here, just kind of like on a temple, like you looked at in Greece. So they support an entablature with a crowning element topped with a sphere. The sphere right here represents the earth or the universe. You can see it a little bit better there. The cross at the top represents Christ's dominion over the earth and universe. The angels and putti decorate. Angels and putti right here. So here are the angels, here are the putti. They decorate the entablature. And the entablature is hung with tasseled panels, which imitate a cloth canopy. And here is a close-up. Maybe you can see that cloth canopy a little bit better. Well, it's actually not made of cloth, but it's meant to imitate cloth, look like cloth. And then here are the tassels that hang down from it. So this monument also serves as a monument to Pope Urban VIII and his family, the Barberini. We see symbols of bees and suns and laurel leaves on vines. These are all the Barberini family's emblems. It's meant to promote their riches, their power, and their splendor of the Catholic Church, but also of Pope Urban VIII in particular and his family. The power of the Barberini is also shown in the bronze that was used in this piece. So the bronze used in this piece actually came from the Pantheon. So Pope Urban had them remove the bronze from the exterior ceiling of the Pantheon dome, and they used it here in the Baldacchino. As we can see, Bernini combined his talents in architecture and sculpture in this piece. And the combination of architecture and sculpture is one of the characteristics of the Baroque period, particularly of Bernini. So it's an aspect of this mixed media art. Here's just another image so you can see a little bit closer there. Just love the way that he kind of plays with our notions of texture. So this is a bronze piece, but he's depicted cloth. And here's the sun and those bees that I was talking about. Bernini also created a David. He was commissioned to create a David for the nephew of Pope Paul V in 1623. Now, Bernini's version of David introduces a new type of three-dimensional composition. The sculpture intrudes dramatically into the viewer's space, and this is an important element of Baroque art. Here we see David is depicted very active. His body twists to one side, ready to launch the rock. His body is tense with motion and anticipation. His mouth is clenched. His muscles are strained. And the movement of David takes over the surrounding space, and the viewer actually becomes part of the scene, because we can see that David is actually looking kind of out in the distance into our space, because Goliath is implied that he is somewhere out there and that David is about to fire that rock at him. So not only is the viewer's space physically intruded by the twisting elements sticking out of David's actual sculpture, but now the viewer is becoming part of the action. So this shows the immediacy and the inclusion of the viewer in the work of art, and so this becomes a new important direction for art. One of the differences between Michelangelo and Bernini's David is the moment depicted. Here we have that intellectual renaissance where David is thinking about how he's going to kill Goliath. Then we have that action moment with the Baroque period where David is launching his attack on Goliath. He is in the moment. He's determined, and he's about to take him down. So the moment depicted is also at the height of the drama of the moment. So this is before, when he's calm and thinking, and here is when it's actually happening, or in the middle of the action. Also, of course, a marked difference is that Bernini's David has some clothes on, while Michelangelo's David does not. That is a mark of the Counter-Reformation.